time ever. Mike Monaco joins us from ESPN, play-by-play announcer for the worldwide leader, does some work with the ACC network, and occasionally Boston Red Sox games as well, and kind enough to spend a few minutes. Mike, first off, great job on the College World Series. I know it certainly is a big stage, and you got a lot of interested fan bases, and it's a lot of work to get ready for that many teams. Really, really nice work.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it was, obviously just a thrill to be a part of it, and to see all the fan bases, come together in Omaha. And for me, it was not just my first time calling that event, but first time experiencing it, even as a fan. And I had so many people tell me just through the years that, that is one thing as a sports fan that you just have to do. Even if your college team is not there, you've got to experience it, and boy, did it live up to it and then some.
On the drive home on Monday, I was talking to Kyle Peterson for a little while, and he answered the phone and he just said, "Wow, that was a thing." So that thing that included a whole bunch of people in red and blue over the last couple of days. Give me a high level thought before we kind of drill down on Ole Miss and what you saw from them and kind of what you took away from it on the event. I know you said first time you've been. So as a first-time consumer, even though it was a work trip for you, what are the lasting memories of the College World Series, kind of the big picture?
I would say big picture, looking out from the booth, or even some of the games where I was not broadcasting, where I just went as a fan, just looking out and seeing a absolutely packed ballpark of that size and with fans that engaged was pretty special. And I think that's what I'll take most from it. So I of the championship series, I obviously only called game 2. Carl Ravitch was on game 1, but I was there up in the booth, different booth down the hall, just watching in game 1, getting ready for game 2. And sitting there looking out at the crowd in the lead up to the game was pretty staggering. And I think that will be one of my lasting images as well, just seeing how much blue and red was out there. And then hearing how loud it got, in particular during the back-to-back home runs. I think that is maybe the moment that I take, along with obviously, when Ole Miss, secured the national championship with that final strikeout. But it was just special seeing the crowds, big picture, and then certainly respected to Ole Miss.
Mike, I know, doing Red Sox games, that's obviously a big stage. Did this feel like kind of the biggest moment of your career so far?
I think maybe in some ways, yeah. Red Sox games are a big stage as well. I was fortunate enough to do the NHL playoffs this year for ESPN, and, that came with it as well. But I didn't do a game 7 in the NHL playoffs, and, I've never called a national championship before. And so, I kind of woke up on Sunday thinking, all right, well, and going into it, that no matter what happens in game 1, game 2, some team is going to have a chance to win a national championship. So just to myself, I tried to treat it with that sort of magnitude around it, and tried to be thinking, before the game, during the game, how would you caption this type of moment for Ole Miss as a team, the players, the staff, everything they've been through, and then for the fan base as well, and sort of the magical ending to the season over the last few weeks, and what was a wacky year and what's an incredible fan base and a proud program, but obviously going to a height that they hadn't been to before. So, it very well might be, and certainly was an absolute blessing to be there for it.
Visiting with Mike Monaco from ESPN. He was on the call on Sunday for the championship game, the final game of the College World Series. So about this Ole Miss team, there were so many stories, and we've talked about them ad nauseum for months now. The rise, the fall, the rise again, and ultimately kind of being crowned champions. What story, though, or storyline stood out for you maybe the most?
I would say, certainly, and this goes in the ad nauseum camp, Tim Elko's story. I mean, and we deal with it sort of on a national stage there, and you have to consider the listener or the viewer that doesn't know his full story. But I guess digging a little bit deeper beyond that, I would say the combo of Dylan DeLucia and Hunter Elliott. And during the college baseball regular season, I call a lot of ACC games for us at ESPN.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, the ACC is a phenomenal conference. They had a great year. A couple of breaks go differently in the super regionals. They could have, a handful of teams in Omaha. But something to me that stood out kind of experiencing, that number of SEC teams or future SEC teams for the first time there was like Ole Miss was positioned to have Dylan DeLucia and Hunter Elliott at whatever point in the season just emerge into two absolute bona fide studs by the time you got to Omaha. And that's, to me, is why the SEC is just different. So I would say that's sort of the storyline for me that jumps out the most. And, the outings that Hunter Elliott had his last however many starts, last 4 starts, whatever it is. And then the 2 outings that DeLucia had, I had the first one of those. And, if we thought that was good, then he comes out and goes shut out the next time.
Yeah.
Man, he just that special. And so I think for me, that was sort of the biggest, takeaway along with, the magic of Tim Elko and everything he stands for. And tied into that, he and other seniors coming back for another year and getting the program to a place it had never been.
I don't ask this at all out of disrespect for Oklahoma because I think that's a really good team, and I think individually there were some outstanding players, especially their shortstop. But I'm curious from your perspective if you thought maybe the moment was a little big or there was an intimidation factor because of the crowd for Oklahoma. You look at an Ole Miss team that plays in front of 10,000 at home, and they go to Alec Box in Baton Rouge, and they go to Fayetteville, and they go to Mississippi State. They're used to environments that are big and loud and rowdy and intimidating, and that's not really the case for Oklahoma on a week-in, week-out basis. Do you think that factored in to maybe some plays that Oklahoma normally would make that they didn't?
I think it's hard to argue that the atmosphere and the crowd did not have an impact. And really from the get-go of game 1, like when you look at how that game started, I just think you'd be hard-pressed to say that the crowd was not a factor in that. And who has experienced an environment exactly like that before? Like, you don't get that size crowd anywhere during the regular season or anywhere through super regionals in college baseball. And then when you factor in whatever the percentage breakdown was, 90-10, more or less, whatever it is, in terms of the fan base, I think it's just I think it's impossible to say that wasn't a factor. And so I think a team can be totally prepared and mentally tough, but it's different when you hear a roar of that volume, when there's a wild pitch or pass ball or a misplay at shortstop or whatever it is that gets you going like that. And Skip Johnson, their head coach, the Sooners head coach, he didn't say that, he didn't want to say that, I guess he didn't want to put it in those terms after game 1, but he and a couple of players, kind of acknowledged that maybe they were sped up. And I think that's, maybe a little more, whatever you want to call it, it made a difference when you're playing on an atmosphere like that, that loud. And, hey, it's understandable, too. Like you said, Richard, I mean, if you're not used to SEC crowds and Swayze and however many thousand people, like, it is going to be different, and there is going to be an adjustment period.
Last thing, I'm going to completely switch gears on you, and I'm going to ask this as a guy who, grew up in Boston and went to school at Notre Dame and lives in the Midwest. The news of today in the college football world that shakes everything up with UCLA, USC, I'm not going to ask you what you think about that. I'm going to ask you, is Notre Dame forever going to stay independent, or are they finally going to go, you know what, there's so much changing, it's time to get in the league? You got 1 minute.
So they value that. Yeah, we could go 100 minutes on it. I'll say they value their independence as much as anything at that university, for the history, for the finances, for what it allows them to do scheduling-wise. In every way, they want to preserve that as best they can. Now, I will say that as the times are changing and today's, potential news, seeming, news that's going to happen, with something that seismic, I don't think you can put anything off the table with Notre Dame. As much as they would want to retain independence, I don't think it's an ironclad thing the way college sports are changing that'll necessarily and absolutely always be the case.
No reporter hat here, just gut, heart. Would you rather see Notre Dame as part of the Big Ten or the SEC?
just totally unbiased, I would say Big Ten. I think it's just more
I assume
natural
that's the answer for most
geographically.
people.
Yeah, it's just more natural geographically, and they have natural built-in rivalries that way. But, I mean, in terms of wanting to be the best in the sport, maybe that doesn't, fit the way you want to, and maybe they think otherwise.
Mike, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. Good visiting with you again. Great job, and hope we can